We're going to be talking about swatting bugs and such. First off, my name is Travis Compton. So swatting bugs, keeping them away. Debugging 101. So this is the first section we're going to start at. So debugging. What is debugging? We're going to start super basic here. Debugging is just the process of finding errors in your script and then fixing them, right? So finding these things using various tools and such that I'm going to show you how to use, identifying the error, and then getting rid of it. Debugging 101. These are the two main tools we're going to be talking about today. Primarily info. So alert, the difference between these really is when you're scripting, and I'll show you because I don't know if we've actually shown you how to get into the Deluge interface yet, so some of you may not know that. I'll show you it very quickly. But when you're writing the script, there are two types of debugging tools you can use. Primarily, info is going to be the one you're using most often. Alert is something that will pop up when you're actually using the app, right? So ideally, you're finding the issues before you launch into the live mode, and info is the one that's going to give you that. Alert can come in handy in some situations, and we'll see some of those, but info is the main one that we're going to be dealing with. So, very quickly, what's an expression? An expression is any script which holds a value such as a string being just text, as you've learned, like Bruce Wayne. A variable, a field value, so something that was input into a field, or an equation, which is a string of values. I'm going to try and shy away from saying expression too much here because it can just be something that's non-specific and confusing. But in case you see that in any help material, that's what it means. So remember, these two things. So what you're going to be doing with these in your code as you're writing it, if you're trying to debug something, figure out what these words, what these variables you've written hold, you're going to be putting info and then the value name, or info, whatever the expression is. There's that word again, right? Also keep in mind, creator reads one line at a time. This is just a something structural here. So some programming language, they will take all the code and read it in chunks or blocks. It's helpful to know that creator reads one line at a time. So if you're writing it out, right, and then you have code, info, code, it's going to give you the first info. So it's going to give you it in order, and if it finds an error, it's not going to read anything past that error. It's going to give you the error and then stop there when you try and save it. So let me show you. This is probably a good time to just show you the interface very quickly. So in edit this application, go to workflow. And so that quick, you're in the Deluge interface. You have the free flow scripting, which we're in here, which I prefer, which a lot of people that do a lot of this prefer, just because there's a little bit more control, and it still does give you pre-fills and useful things like that. But there's the script builder, which is more of a drag and drop thing. I prefer free flow just because it's across, if you're familiar with programming at all, it's just you write the code, it does what you write, you're responsible for typos, all that. So it's a little bit more responsibility, but I prefer it over the slight hand-holding that you'll otherwise get. So for example, you see hide classes, hide experiences. That's where you would put info, right? It's a command, right? So info, for example, info, and then you could fill in a bunch of things, and it'll pop up various recommendations here. So that's how you'll be writing info, whatever expression you want the information on. So for example, this will be the first quiz thing I'm doing with you. X equals 10, X equals 32, right? You write those two things down. Then you put info X. What is X in this case? 32. Okay, and why is that? Because it reads one line at a time. So it says, okay, X equals 10, X equals 32. X equals 32 is the last definition you gave that variable. So it goes 32. What about the other one? It equals 10, right? One line at a time. So moving on from that to write comments. So within Deluge, oftentimes, this is general, just good programming etiquette. When you're writing something, you might have hundreds of lines of code. You might have just a few. In any case, it helps to define in layman's terms maybe what a function is or what the variable does. If you just have a lot of names and you have a lot of different areas of code that are doing a lot of different things. So in order to do that, you can write things within the Deluge screen here that are called comments. So if I put 2 slashes in front of this, it's no longer going to read that. So it grays it out. That's no longer something that's going to be considered when it's running through this code. That's just for you. So you'll see good developers a lot of the time, what they'll do is they will comment out their code just so that when they come back to it, maybe they wrote a thing a long time ago and it's hard to pick up what all the variable names were, hard to figure out just what exactly they were trying to do in any given code block. They'll put comments saying, okay, right here I am parsing this thing, or right here I am doing this for this specific kind of user. So it helps to do that. Also, you can comment out multiple lines of script, as you can see. So you see the slash in front of this line by putting these characters, and then whatever's between them will get commented out and won't be read. And that's also useful as you're learning Deluge. Maybe you'll have a bit of script that does some amount of what you want it to do, but not everything. It helps to just copy that, comment out your old version, and try a new version. So you won't have to delete it, because when you're trying to save a script, if there's an error, it won't let you save it. So you can always comment it out, return to it, save it, return to it next time. And it's a way of just keeping your progress and trying different variations to try and figure out what problem you're having. So common errors and how to fix them. Dynamic hiding. This sounds like an excellent game of hide and seek. It is not. It is a tool that I'm going to teach you about. So hiding, you just saw over here, right? You saw the code within the Deluge interface. Remember where we are? We're going to use dynamic hiding to get rid of some fields that aren't needed based on choices that have been made. So we all understand if statements pretty well, right? We're all on the same page there. Here we are. This is the code for this live app. If past student equals yes, then show classes. Okay? So have you taken one of our classes before? Yes, I have. Hit that. All right, so it uses a little bit of simple logic. What classes did you take? And you can see that here. Else if past students equals no, show experience. So maybe I'm a student, and I don't know how computers work, and I'm clicking around and I'm crazy. I hit yes, right? And I think, oh no, I forgot. I meant no. So I hit no. Well, now we still have this here, this question. So that's not good because they haven't taken any classes. Now they might put in some junk data that's going to screw up your records. That's not useful at all. So if I switch back, you can see that that's always going to stay there. And that could end up screwing up your records pretty hard. So that's what this code does. So what can we do in this code to fix that issue? Well, that's where dynamic hiding comes in. So you would edit the script. See, we're not accounting for people who change their input. Anyway, so we have to rehide the fields if a user's choice changes. So for example, previously we didn't have this hide stuff here, right? So now, if a student says yes, show the classes and hide experience. If they say no, show experience and hide classes. So you're building in a little bit more logic to hide things so your records don't get screwed up. The variable is not defined error. What to look for here? So this, I'm going to go into the audience a little bit, back and forth, right? So what's the issue here? Can anyone see what the problem is with this script? Where's the error? Right, inconsistent spelling for to declare a variable. So the computer does not read this as, oh no, you've misspelled your previous variable. It reads that as a new variable that you have not yet defined. An improper statement error. So this is what it looks like. You will see this quite often. What to look for? A missing semicolon. So whenever you're missing a semicolon after these, that's the error you're going to get. And some of these errors are kind of general, which is why I'm giving you these specific cases. And I wanted to build this slideshow so that when we give you these things later, you can run through and say, okay, this error has these improper uses of code associated with it. So you can actually check them against the error, which can be a little too general at times. So again, improper statement, an extra semicolon where one doesn't belong. Can someone point that out? At the end of the fourth line. Very powerful. You did it. An extra semicolon where one doesn't belong, correct. Operators. A missing operator, unclosed parentheses. So the semicolon, you're missing the operator between the two. Otherwise, it won't really know what to do there. It'll just see two variables floating next to each other, and the parentheses will also throw it off. Okay, an improper statement. Is there an error here? This one's the easiest one, right? It just starts with a number, so that's wrong, right? You cannot start a variable name with a number, and a variable name cannot have a space, which is why we have to use underscores there. Operation error. This one goes a little bit, so we have the null versus zero talk earlier. This one gets into that a little bit. So it's a bit of a side tangent on it, though. Null as opposed to the completely empty character, those two do not function the same. Also, there's a difference between 0 and null. So you think null means nothing, 0 means nothing. In this case, it's a little different because 0 is considered an operator, and you can add numbers to that, right? 5 plus 0 is 5. 6 plus 0 is 6. 7 plus 0, it's 7, right? Whereas 7 plus null is what? Well, it's actually an error, right? Because you can't add to what is the concept of nothing, which is what null is, right? As opposed to 0, which is a different concept of nothing. So for example, if the price or quantity are null, the user will receive an error, right? It'll look quite a bit like this. So in this case, and I'm going to show you how to read these now, because these can, I mean, just looking at it, you can see how crazy this can look. Input total cost equals input.quantity times input.cost, right? So that will feed you this error, which how are we going to read that? Over here, you'll see form actions, right? So these are all the actions, the different states on the form. So on add, on edit, on delete, and then we have field actions. So these are actions associated with a specific field that you have added. So past student, on user input, that's if once somebody starts typing in there. On update, once it's fully typed in and updated, and you're moving on. So this is here on the field action of on user input under quantity, right? So as soon as somebody types in quantity, it's going to start doing this script here. You can see here someone typed, and it gave you this error. Can we see this? Can everyone see this? Error in executing on user input, script of quantity. So here is where it's telling you, remember on the side there, under quantity, the field, it's giving you on user input. So you can follow that tree up to find where the error is. And then it's giving you more lines about specifically what the error found was, which if we remember is a null error. Because we have not defined here what quantity and cost are, they are null, right? And you can't add to null. So it's trying to do arithmetic with the concept of nothing instead of just 0. You can't multiply null times null or null times 9. It won't work. So again, here, it's a similar thing. Again, whether you're multiplying or adding, it's just not something that it can do. So you have to set those fields to 0 first. So here, so how do we avoid that operator error? Use conditionals to check for null values. Only run equations when relevant fields have values entered. And of course, you can read the last one. So let me just describe this syntax a little bit. We're all familiar with if fields, right? So instead of letting the script go and try and add things to the null values, we can say if the input is null, so if there's nothing there, not 0, not 1, not 3, but nothing, and when you see two ands like this, that means if this statement and this statement are also true, so they both have to be true in this case. If they are both null, so if they're both empty, execute the calculations, right? And we can apply that to the code we just saw here. So, if it's null, if they're both null, and that's true for both of them, then we can multiply. Otherwise, alert them to fill in the space. So we're not multiplying with a number versus nothing ever, right? We're not going to do that because it'll otherwise alert. So this operator, so when you see an exclamation point and an equal, that means it's not equal to, right? As opposed to the equal, which means if it is, so it's helpful to know these things. We have a list of operators within the help guides too that you can run through. This is another error. You might receive number of arguments mismatch. If the text equals text.replace all, so this is a function, right? Did we learn about functions? We did, correct? Do we all have kind of a grasp on functions? Text.replace all, embarrass. So the issue here is this function requires 2 separate strings to run. Up here we only gave it 1. We're telling it find all the text that is equivalent to this spelling and replace it with a different spelling, right? But in this function, we didn't give it the alternate spelling that it'll replace it with. Over here we did. So you have to follow the syntax of the particular function you're using. So function not found. Do we see an error here? So if you were familiar with the massive function list in Creator, you could see there's just no S, right? So just make sure to spell the functions correctly. Always consult the list whenever you get these types of errors. Converting data types. So this is something that's going to help you quite a bit. Not all data types are equivalent. For example, you cannot put a decimal data type in a field that requires decimals into a number field because the number field doesn't know how to read decimals. It wasn't built to do that. So in order to fix that, we can convert them using functions. So for example, if we put input.decimal and we added the .toString function, we would convert that to a string, and now it's a different type of data type, and we can insert it into different fields. Same thing with .toDate or .toTime. And .tolong converts to integer. That's just the way, to the number, right, to the number field. So for example, if we change it to a string, we can now put it into a text field because that field's required data type matches the data we're trying to put into it. Useful to know, drop-down fields, even if you have them with numbers, the numbers are considered strings by Creator. Kind of a weird thing, but just helpful to keep in mind. So in this case, this would result in an error because the input rating for this field is greater than 4. Why would that result in an error? Text, right. It's not reading the 4 as a number. It's reading it as a string. So we can't read an operator to string. That's like saying if it's greater than Bruce Wayne. We have theories on who's greater than Bruce Wayne, but we have no reliable list on that. So this would result in error. So what we can do here, remember, convert it to data type. So how do we make that string useful as a number? Convert it to a number, right? If the input.rating .toLong, we're using the toLong function that makes it a number, is greater than 4, and the feedback equals positive. So now we can assess the 4 as a number instead of just a string, like a word. And we can also apply operators to it. So best practices, let me run through these very quickly. Make sure to leave lots of comments. Again, I mentioned this before. This is not just for if you're a developer, this is for everyone. We have apps that we have written, and they are complex, which tracks ping pong scores, and it pulls in weather data, even though it's always played inside. Make sure to comment these things out, because you might not know how to edit these things down the line unless you comment them and identify some of these things for yourself. Remember, it reads one line at a time, right? Creator does. So if we want info on multiple variables, it helps to, when we're asking for the info, to label the output every time. So instead of saying just give me info on all these variables and it'll spit out a list of information, you can add give me info, add a string in front of it with the name of the variable, and then the output of the variable so that you can identify what it's putting out to you. So you can test multiple things at once without getting confused when you're looking at what creators spit out to you. So this is also useful when you're trying to manipulate the things people have put into fields. It helps to label those specifically as input dot whatever your field name is, as opposed to just the field name, so that you can, and when you're looking back at your code, you're not looking at these things and wondering, is this a variable? Is this someone's input, what they've put in? And then also functions. Somebody came up here recently, the case study, and was talking about how they had built a bunch of useful functions that they use throughout their apps. Whenever you build something really cool, it helps to spin it out into a function so that when you're writing code later on, or if you want to use it in a different area of an app or a different code block, you can just reuse it. So it helps to save those things as functions, and then you can recycle them. Again, consistent naming schemes when you're naming variables, some basic stuff. Don't give them crazy names all the time. Make something that you can identify easily and then constantly use that. And then use variable names that are descriptive but also short. So for example, if I'm writing a thing about a bunch of meeting times and manipulating that data, I don't want to name it just time 1 and remember Saturday and all this fun stuff. Something descriptive can help.